The past 2 nights, I slept with my blinds open without realising they were, as I leave for work when it's dark out, and come home when it's also dark out. The past 2 nights, I kept waking up over and over. I recently moved here, and was told jokingly, but also seriously, that I'm in Wendigo County. This morning, I was outside scraping the ice off my car, and all of a sudden, the street light went off. The motion sensor lights on the garage turned off, and there were no lights on in any house on the street. I had this super intense fight or flight feeling and audibly said no, and got in my car and made sure not to look outside the windows. Something in me was saying not to look outside at all. The lights all came back on a few moments later, and I no longer felt that primal fear. Well, on the way home tonight, I saw something out of the corner of my eye run beside my car along the shoulder of the highway on my passenger side, and felt that primal fear settle in again. I tried to tell myself I was just scaring myself and to let it go. But as I was driving, I couldn't not look outside. Plus, I had to watch for deer, so I couldn't just mindlessly look straight forward. When I turned off the highway and onto my exit, I felt even more fear. I was now off the main road, with no lights other than my headlights. I again tried to shake it off, but as I pulled onto the street to the house, I heard what sounded like either a very loud exhale or a whisper. But it sounded like it was outside of my car, if that makes sense. I pulled into the driveway shakily, and as I put the car in park and turned it off, I saw something again from the corner of my eye, on the other side of my roommate's vehicle. It very quickly dashed off. It was tall, but I didn't get a good look at it. I suddenly felt watched from every direction, and felt terrified to even turn my car off, knowing I had to walk a few feet into the house. But with it being 8 degrees outside, I couldn't just stay in the car. I ran in as quickly as I could and instantly felt safer once I crossed the threshold. The house has been cleansed due to previous paranormal experiences, but as soon as I got to my room and saw my blinds open, I felt extremely scared again. I pulled the blinds down quickly, and in the time I've been writing this, I've been hearing something brush up against the house outside. Sometimes quietly, other times louder. Sure, it's windy, but there's nothing physically close to the house that could be brushing up against the outer walls. And my eyes keep being drawn toward the window. I don't know what I saw on either occurrence, but I do know that I feel like something is waiting to get me. I've always been super sensitive to things that most people can't see, and this is the first time I've felt this much fear here. Even inside, I don't feel safe. What should I do? As weird as it sounds, there are apparently paranormal Santa Claus sightings happening. Below is a story a friend shared. This friend was 5 or 6 at the time of their experience. I also spoke with someone who said their neighbour growing up shared a story. She was an elderly woman and shared this story with tears in her eyes. She was out walking alone through the snow in the countryside one night, and she began hearing sleigh bells. Above her in the air flew a sleigh with white reindeer. The man in the sleigh was a muscular mountain man type, with a long beard and a pointed green hat, like some early renditions of Santa. He was holding a wand. True story? I don't know. But there are many accounts involving Santa, and most of them appear to be creepy or eerie. Here's my friend's account. Now, these Santa sightings, I'm intrigued because once when I was about 5 or 6, I was convinced I saw Santa flying in the sky. I told my mom, which at the time she played it up, but later as a teen and I brought it up, she said it must have been an airplane in the sky, but it definitely wasn't a plane. It didn't move in a straight, steady line like a plane, nor did it have the blinky lights. I don't know. I still remember watching it through my bedroom window, watching it in the night sky, weaving up and down. It looked exactly how you'd imagine Santa in his sleigh with reindeer flying through the sky would look. It even went across the moon in a very classic silhouette. You could only see it because of the moonlight, not close enough to see any detail like colours or anything. It just looked like a sleigh with reindeer gliding across the sky. I woke up at like 2 a.m. from excitement. I crept out to the living room and saw the presents from Santa and the stockings and was really excited. I went back to bed, but obviously was too excited to sleep. I was just waiting for there to be enough daylight to wake up my parents. I was staring out the window while lying in my bed when I saw it. The first incident happened around the beginning of February last year. My partner had some work in Paris, and we decided we were just going to extend his trip so we can spend a week exploring. Long story short, we were on the subway at night. I can't remember what day it was, but it was definitely either a Friday or Saturday, since it was truly packed. People were in and out of the train, nothing out of the normal. So immediately, I noticed a man walking onto the train. Tall, like this man was at least 6'3", 6'4", well kept, wearing all black business casual, huge scar running down his face. This man looked like a typical movie villain. Now, I never believed in energies or whatever until this encounter. This man truly gave off non-human vibes, dread, pretty much everything gross and scary, all in one emotion. I literally had to look away and keep myself from getting nauseous from his energy. It literally felt like something was cosplaying being a human being. I also felt like he sensed me realising that he wasn't human, because he scared me down the whole time with his weird fucking scary cold stare. Must I add, everyone on the train didn't even spare him a second glance. We left, and from that point, I just had horrible, violent nightmares throughout the trip. So fast forward to these past couple of months. I've been noticing people stare at me the same way this man looked at me. One incident was Black Friday shopping at the mall, and a woman a couple feet away from me was having a conversation on the phone, and she was smiling, laughing, etc. I could literally immediately see her expression change, and she just looked up at me with the same blank, scary-ass stare as the guy from the train. Even my friend was like, "The fuck is that woman's deal?" Couple of seconds of just staring. She went back on talking like nothing happened. I had multiple incidents where people seemed to immediately change their expression and look at me with the same dread, trance-like stare, etc. The weird thing is, I'll have the same feeling of nausea hit, and then we'll have violent nightmares whenever I encounter these weirdos. Anybody have any similar stories or encounters where you felt like something isn't human? I've felt off today, like something could happen if I and those I care about don't take care to be safe. I get these feelings pretty regularly, and sometimes we'll be given premonitory dreams that are far more specific. With these odd gut feelings though, it's often hard to discern what's something external that I'm picking up on, and what could just be my own mind messing with me. Today, it's almost certainly the former though. I told my brother to be sure he's careful and safe today, because I've got a fucked up feeling about something. He said he knew, and figures it's connected to something he saw last night. Apparently, after I'd gone to bed, he'd stayed out hanging out with our dog and working on a chainsaw, and saw a huge red orb float up from a riverbed and into the clouds on the other side of a family friend's pasture to the east of our house. Said it made him really uneasy, and he told our dog to get in her house and stay safe. And she went in there and didn't seem to have come out until he came out to check on her this morning. I know red orbs are usually interpreted in two very different ways. Either a sign of protection or something angry and restless showing itself. Given my brother's gut reaction to it, and my feeling that something dangerous is about, I don't really think it can be anything but a warning or sign of something dangerous. It really shouldn't be surprising though, because there's a lot of evil lurking here in Oklahoma. Anytime I've been out of the state for a while, the first thing I feel when I get back is just an oppressive, almost suffocating sense of dread that some very old evil is all around. Can't help but think of talking about it to one of my friends who's chocked about it, and his response just being, "Why do you think we only settled here permanently when we were forced to? That shit doesn't like any humans being there." I definitely think he was right. I just hope me and my brother got enough of a heads up this time to keep it, whatever it is, at bay. It felt very, very real, and not like a dream, but like sitting and talking with a friend. The first visit was someone that went to the same school as me. As real as it felt, I still had doubts due to the lack of relationship I had with the person. They asked me to do something, so I did. We sat and talked for a bit, which wasn't like me, as I have crippling social anxiety and can't openly talk like that. It was nice to experience an anxiety-free conversation, if anything. The second is so special to me, as it was my brother. He would have been my older brother, but middle child. That is if I was ever born. Mom wanted 2 kids, and he would have been number 2. My mother miscarried, but I always loved my brother, even without meeting him. When he came to me in my dream, he looked nearly identical to my dad, but I could also see a lot of my mom, as well as my sister and myself. Strong family resemblance. He appeared the age he would if he was born with a hipster beard and all. I knew who he was immediately. He asked how Mom was doing and how Dad. Not my mom. Just Mom. We talked, and I remember being so happy that he was finally here with me, even if it was only for a little bit. I'm the only one in my family that believes in the paranormal and things like that, so I didn't want to tell my mom, but I was just so happy for so many different reasons. Even if she thought I was batshit crazy, it seemed to make her happy. I've never met anyone that has also been visited in a dream, though I've heard people talk about it and with it on TV. Have you ever been visited in a dream? I'd love to hear about it. Some background. I have very severe arachnophobia and saw a wolf spider in my room, so naturally I didn't sleep in my room for a month, and instead I slept in the living room. One day in about late July this year, I was having trouble sleeping, so I was on my phone in the living room and about to go to sleep. It was around midnight. I heard a sound that sounded like someone had run into the bookshelf behind me. I turned to see a short outline of a glowing person. Me being a scaredy cat, decided to hide under my blanket, repeatedly yelling, "Go away, go away." The next day, I told my grandma what I had seen the night before. My grandma is Christian, but still believes in spirits. So I didn't know exactly if she would believe me. She asked me a few more questions, but didn't really seem that interested. I went to sit down in the living room after the conversation, and then she came running in and asked me again if it was last night. I told her yeah, a little bit before midnight. To which she starts crying, telling me yesterday was 7 years to the day since my mama had died I started crying as well. I've always felt the presence of spirits in my house since I was 3. I even remember one day a spirit trapping me in my room. I've always had severe deja vu and some sleep paralysis, as well as lucid dreaming, but I cut off my lucid dreaming as soon as it happens, as it's a fear of mine. For about a month after that, I would see her around the house every once in a while, but I haven't seen her in a really long time. I do often still feel eyes on me, but I ignore them for long enough, or say go away. They normally do. Many years ago, I had an encounter with a Wendigo. I'm part Cherokee and had heard about these monsters before. It was late at night. I was a teenager. I lived with my family. We had a few dogs and they needed to go outside before bed. One of the dogs would only go in our backyard. One of my family members opened the back door and immediately the dog became aggressive. A dog that had never shown aggression before or after this night. Just as fast as she became aggressive, she became scared and ran back inside. I had just kicked my boots off after wearing them all day and was about to change out of my jeans when this happened. I quickly put my boots back on, grabbed a flashlight and a large club I had recently made. I booked it out of the back of our house and just stopped dead in my tracks. I don't see anything, I don't hear anything, but something was there. I could feel the presence of pure evil. Then I see a shadow moving, and it's huge. The shadow was easily 8 feet tall, vaguely humanoid, but had these massive antlers. Normally, my flashlight is able to illuminate everything pretty well. That night, I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. It was like the light was going into a void. My eyes adjusted to the low light, only starlight letting me see at all. I stand there for what seemed like an eternity as I watch the figure search a workbench before it stops. The figure looks straight forward before turning around to face me, turning to reveal glowing red eyes. The figure and I stare at each other for what must have been only a moment, but felt like lifetimes. I know that showing fear in this situation is only going to kill me, and fighting is a death sentence. But for some reason, I lifted the club and pointed it at the figure. The figure looks at the club and looks back into my eyes before slowly nodding its head up and down a few times. I see my flashlight turn off in my peripheral vision. I look at it and it turns back on, this time illuminating the entirety of the property. I quickly turn on my focus back to the figure, only for the figure to be gone. What was lifetimes to me was no more than a minute in reality. This happened about 6 years ago, but I still remember everything clearly. When my Aunt Pam passed away, she was living in a home. All of her belongings were in a storage unit. Her son, who inherited all of her belongings, picked through all the things he wanted and invited some of the close family to come and pick whatever we wanted. At the unit, my cousins and I banded together and found some items we were fond of. I took these little purple potions bottles, purple china set, purple bedding set with matching curtains. If my aunt and I had one thing in common, it was our love for the colour purple. I fell in love with the items and was super excited to bring them home and bring them back to life by giving them a purpose. Upon returning to the house, my sisters and I rushed inside to decorate our homes with our Aunt Pam's belongings. I set up almost an altar-type place on my vanity, with all of the potion bottles around the china set. My vanity sat right across my sitting area, in the opposite corner of the room. Nighttime rolls around, and my sisters and I are in our separate rooms. My sister Abby is in the room right next to mine, with Maddie being right across from her. I'm sitting in my little reading nook, nose deep in a series I've been binging. My lamp flickers twice, and I lift my head to see what gives. Happens more often than not in our house. I lock eyes with a figure. A woman. A blacked out silhouette. She looks as if she's swimming in water. Her hair is large and curly, floating around her. While I couldn't see her face, I could see it in my brain, as if she was projecting her image to me. Her eyes glowed a faint white. Her hand was out, reaching towards the set of china and potion bottles on my vanity. At first, she wasn't looking at me. I sat holding my breath. I stare at her in fear, fully aware it's my aunt, but absolutely terrified at seeing her. She snaps her head towards me, and my light turns off. I scream as loud as I can for my sister, unable to move. She bursts into my room and turns the light on, asking what the hell is going on. I'm blabbering, trembling, crying, trying my best to explain while Abby is trying her best to keep it together. My screams caused my other sister to wake up as well, and she came into the room, rubbing her eyes and telling me to shut up. We're all talking over each other and discussing who I'm going to sleep with when we hear a bang in the kitchen. My parents were extremely strict on eating schedules. We weren't allowed in the kitchen after dinner, and it was now 10 p.m. My parents slept in the master bedroom, which was the attic above the garage. In order for them to come down, they would have to open the very heavy door, walk down the extremely loud steps, open the obnoxiously loud screeching door. The point being, we would have heard loud and clear if anyone came downstairs. We all froze, staring at each other. My sister's eyes widened as we all realised what's happening. We're listening closely, and it sounds like people are ransacking the cabinets, moving around the silverware, and the pots that hung on the ceiling were banging into each other. Silence fell for a moment, and my sister Maddie decided to check it out. We followed behind her in a single file down the hall. Maddie turns the corner into the kitchen, and she takes a step back, her eyes wide and scanning around. Me and my sister poke our heads around. Every drawer and cabinet are open, and the pots on the ceiling are still swinging slightly. We stand there stunned for a moment when we all sprint upstairs, banging on our parents' door. We explained what happened, and my mother is extremely annoyed. She pulls the camera to the kitchen, and there it is, in all its glory. Our mother isn't one for emotions. She just got to making a pallet in a room for all of us to sleep on. Eventually, we sleep and wake up for school the next morning. My sisters seemed to feel better, but I was still very shaken. We're sitting in the living room, and I ask if Maddie wouldn't mind grabbing my brush and other items from my room. She said yes, as she was tying her shoes. Suddenly, we hear a noise from the back. We all go quiet to hear what it is. It's a piano. My piano in my room. I was terrified, asking if they heard it, and Abby clung to me. Maddie walks to the back to retrieve my items, unfazed, as I ask her to check my piano, because I knew it was unplugged. She emerges moments later with my items, and I ask about the piano. With a straight face, she tells me it was unplugged and off. Needless to say, I didn't sleep in my own room for 3 months. While rooming with my parents, my mother had me look at photos of family members. It wasn't the first time a deceased family member came to visit me. Sometimes I knew them, sometimes I didn't. My mother could also see them. It was a normal thing in our house. In the box was a photo of my Aunt Pam in her mid-20s, and I pointed to it, telling my mum it was her. My mum just nodded and said she was probably coming to say goodbye. Still didn't make me feel any better. Still extremely terrifying. Gives me goosebumps to this day. I live alone with my 7-year-old. I sleep downstairs and he sleeps upstairs. Our complex is huge, made up of a ton of buildings, all built in a very obviously different decades. Ours is one of the oldest, and very creaky, and I'm a crazy light sleeper. So whenever he sneaks up at night, I wake up pretty much instantly. Last night, I was lying in bed and heard the steps around upstairs that always wake me when he gets up in the night. I was thinking about whether he was going to go right back to sleep, or if I was going to have to intervene. Then I heard him come up the downstairs. I knew he must be lonely or afraid, and that I was going to have to get up with him and help him get back to sleep. I opened one eye without moving, just to see what was going on, and saw a child close to his size, in a big puffy coat with their back to me, reaching up with one arm and feeling around the bottom edge of a Tiffany-style lamp I have on a table at the bottom of the stairs. I was wondering why he had taken the time to put on his big coat, and thinking he was about to turn on the lamp and ask me to walk him back upstairs. But then I opened the other eye, and the child was completely gone. At that point, I got up and went upstairs. My son was still asleep. I didn't feel like I'd woken up from a dream. It felt like I'd been lying there listening and thinking for a while. I've scared myself before in the night, reading or watching scary things like anyone does, and getting nervous something might be in the room with me. But when I would look, there would be nothing. This time, I wasn't scared at all. And when I realised nothing was there, I was very surprised I had actually really seen something. It was in a very distinct shape, and it was moving pretty energetically. That's why I thought it was my son, afraid at night. I should also mention I have string lights going down the stairway that I put up, so he wouldn't scare me in the night if he needed to. So it's actually pretty well lit down there, especially opening your eyes after they've been shut for a while. It wasn't like I was making out vague shapes in the dark. Anyway, I've been trying to search around today about seeing things or apparitions with only one eye and yielding no really helpful results. So I figured I'd share here. Not the scariest encounter, but I can't stop thinking about it. I've had a few unexplained experiences in my life, but this was the most terrifying. My grandparents had a holiday home on the Isle of Wight, UK. The house itself was a grand Victorian mansion that had been turned into apartments. My grandparents had a ground floor apartment, which included a garden with a sea view from the cliff tops. It really was beautiful. I had a large family, and we all stayed there regularly, together or with our separate families. Over the years, family members had seen things, like an apparition in the hall, an apparition of a Victorian lady walking across the garden. A few people had witnessed the wardrobe fly open in the middle of the night, but I had not seen or heard a thing over 20 years. My grandparents were getting older and wanted to sell their holiday home. Last night, I stayed there with my family. My parents were in one bedroom, and my brother and sister were with me in another. There were 2 beds, a wardrobe in the room along with an ensuite shower. During the night, my younger brother got up and started sleepwalking. He stood in the ensuite and kept repeating that he had to go to work. My brother hated the ensuite from a baby. It was dark and creepy and had no windows. He would never get used to it. I guided him back to his camp bed and we both went back to sleep. Later in the night, I woke up because I heard a loud banging sound. I looked around and saw my brother and sister sleeping. The banging continued. I looked behind me where the sound was coming from and saw the headboard was moving back and forth from the wall. I then realised my bed was in fact shaking. The room became blacker than black. I was terrified and hid under the covers. I was so petrified, I think I passed out because I can't remember trying to get back to sleep. When I got up, I told my siblings at the breakfast table. My brother said, "That happened to me." He said years before, the same thing had happened to him, but he kept screaming for Mum and Dad. He said the room got darker too. He had never told anyone the story. He's an adult now and still doesn't believe it was paranormal. I can't really explain what happened that night. I mentioned about my brother sleepwalking as it was so out of character for him. It just felt part of all the weirdness. I don't think it's sleep paralysis, as I distinctly remember moving around in the bed. Would love to hear thoughts. Malevolent or playful? I normally lose people when I get to bed shaking a bit. I know it sounds far-fetched, but it really did happen. Trying to move on from the untimely death of his wife, a corporate trainer named Stephen LeChance moved into a huge house in Union, Missouri with his kids in May of 2001. With 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a large front porch, garden and a basement. This house was considerably spacious compared to the cramped apartment they had previously stayed in. On the day the family moved in, a sedan slowed down near the house, and it caught Stephen's attention. As Stephen kept staring at the car, its windows rolled down, and the passengers shouted, "Hope you'll get along okay there." Before he could ask them anything more, the chance drove away extremely fast. Eventful initial days for the LeChance family. While unpacking their luggage after moving in, the family noticed a picture frame with the image of an angel constantly falling from the wall of the living room. In fact, it was not just the picture frame. The family also found it really hard to keep other objects in place as they kept falling off. At night, Stephen's daughter reported seeing the closet door open on its own, and she heard boxes move in the neighbouring room. During their initial days at the house, the children started noticing that their neighbours would cross the road when they approached their house in order to avoid getting close to it. Also, when Stephen and his children approached them to find the reason behind this odd behaviour, they were too hesitant to talk to them. Thus, the family's initial days at the house passed with them rearranging picture frames and things that were magically falling off, listening to strange noises in the night, and trying to find out the reason behind the strange behaviour of their neighbours. An extremely paranormal day. One day, while one of Stephen's sons ventured into the basement to retrieve the garden hose for his father, he started feeling an eerily dark presence around him. With the presence starting to get on his nerves, the 10-year-old started running out of the basement with the hose in his hands. While he was running up the basement stairs, he heard loud, heavy footsteps following him, and when he turned to see what it was, he saw a huge black figure chasing him. With the figure almost closing him down, he ran out of the basement, screaming at the top of his voice, and closed the door. Hearing the screams of his son, Stephen rushed to the basement and the kitchen, only to find his son standing in the middle of a puddle of his own urine. After listening to his son's claims, Stephen went into the basement to investigate, but he found nothing unordinary inside it. On the evening of the very same day, while the kid was walking out of the bathroom, he saw a huge figure run down the stairs beside him. The extremely huge figure had a face that resembled a clown with no eyes, and it was running towards him as if it wanted to hurt him. Petrified, the kid ran towards Stephen's room, screaming for his life. Hearing the claims of his son, he went to investigate once again. As he couldn't find any evidence for his claims, he put the blame on his son's imagination and warned his other 2 kids to not tease their brother. That night, however, Steve would find himself in the shoes of his son. That night, soon after he fell asleep, Stephen was bolted out of his sleep by a deafening noise. When he slowly opened his eyes, he saw the figure of an old man wearing a red flannel shirt, standing in the doorway in front of him through his blurry vision. This figure stood motionless at the doorway, and with its emotionless face, it appeared as if it was staring at him. With his face growing pale in fear, Stephen rubbed his eyes to get a better look, but by the time he opened his eyes after rubbing them, the figure was already gone. Stephen tried to convince himself, saying that he was making it up because of stress, but he would be proved wrong as strange physical happenings followed. Horror intensifies. Following this paranormal eventful day, the lights in the house started turning on by themselves. Despite the family carefully turning the lights off before leaving the house, they would always be greeted by a fully lit house every time they returned. With the help of his father, Stephen checked the circuit boards of the house, but they seemed to be in perfect shape, and they showed no signs of malfunction. Also, the family and its visitors started feeling strange electrical charges while they entered different rooms of the house. They felt as if a warmth passed through them, and it made their hair stand straight. With time, the doors of the house started opening and shutting on their own, and the family started seeing a huge dark figure in the doorway of their rooms. The kids dreaded being alone and found it hard to even go from one room to another alone. Screams commence. One day, while Stephen was taking things out of his closet, he started feeling an eerily dark presence around him. With a strong sense of being watched, he turned around to investigate. When he turned, he saw the dark figure standing right in front of him, and it was staring at him with its featureless face. Scared by the intensity of the paranormal around him, Stephen decided to leave the house. So, picking up his car keys, he calmly instructed his children to stop what they were doing and follow him to the car. As the family were on their way to leave the house, loud, painful, torturing and agonizing screams started to pour out of the walls of the building. With the screams getting deafeningly louder, the family ended up racing out of the house, into their car. When Stephen turned his head toward the house while running away, he saw the dark figure standing near the window of the upstairs bedroom, and it appeared to be staring at the fleeing family. The next day, when Stephen went back into the house to investigate, he did not find anything that could have caused the screams he heard the previous night. A few days later, the agonizing screams returned. The LaChance family moves out. One night, while Stephen was speaking to his mother on a call, the doors behind him started rattling. The intensity of this rattling sound slowly escalated, and it evolved into agonizing screams. The house began to shake, and a foul odour monopolized the air within. Stephen put down the phone and ran towards his kids' room, but he was locked inside the room as the rattling door closed on its own. As he was pounding and tugging the shut door, Stephen started feeling the presence of something evil behind him. Along with the screaming of the house, he started hearing the screams of his children and the disembodied voice of a man. With the sound of the screams exponentially increasing, Stephen started praying and the door finally opened. Stephen rushed towards his kids to make sure they were safe, and the family ended up moving out of the house in July of the same year. A new family. A few years later, through a paranormal forum, Steve got to know that the house was being inhabited by a new family. This family was made up of Linda, her husband, her teenage daughter, and her grandson. Stephen approached them to inform them about the paranormal nature of the house, but upon listening to Linda, he understood that she knew better. According to Linda, while alone in the house, she would hear someone breathing right next to her. Unexplainable footsteps inside the house were so common that the family started getting normalized to it. Also, the electrical strangeness inside the house had never changed. Creepy, isn't it? But these are just the less intense paranormal events Linda and her family experienced. One night, the police showed up on the doorstep of the house, claiming to have received a suicide call from the house. The family members were sound asleep, and they had no clue about what the police were talking about. Also, things inside the house randomly catch fire, and the dolls in the house would often be found with their hair cut short. What devastated the family members most was finding their cat dead on the floor of the hall, with its back and neck broken like a twig. The new family moves out. Fearful for his new friend and her family, Stephen felt he had to help. To get a better understanding of the paranormal events in the house, Stephen and Linda invited a clairvoyant woman to help them. When this woman was walking upstairs, she was lifted 3 feet off the floor by something invisible and thrown against the wall. The woman was completely terrified and she ran out of the house in horror. Before leaving, she told them that their house was thoroughly haunted, and she suggested Linda move out of the house as soon as she could. According to this woman, the basement of this house served as a highway for evil. With not enough money to move out of the house, Linda continued to live in the house with a family. With time, the house made Linda and her daughter fantasize about killing each other. This got to a point where Linda started locking herself up at night. If she failed to do it for even a night, she would find her daughter standing over her in the middle of the night. Linda started seeing scratches and bite marks on her shoulders and arms while waking up, and she reported being assaulted by a large black entity thrice. With the paranormal events getting on her nerves, Linda started to become mentally unstable. After trying to kill her husband, she was institutionalized. After this event, Linda and her family moved out of the house as well. Investigation. With the details about the paranormal events in the house spreading, different mediums and research groups started visiting the property, trying to find an explanation. Almost all of them confirmed that this house had a demonic infestation. During his first visit to the property, an investigator named Greg could only stay inside the house for a couple of minutes. The moment he stepped into the house, he instantly got a dreadful headache, and he was overwhelmed with horrid nausea. When he went back into the house, he reported experiencing inexplicable temperature changes in the basement of the house. According to Greg, the house was cursed and no one could escape it. A Missouri paranormal research investigator named Alex lost his mind after becoming enchanted by the paranormal entity inside the house. He had reportedly brought black magic books into the house and demanded to perform a bloodletting ceremony in the basement, during which he would bind the demons to him. Denied any further access to the property, he is said to have become homicidal and suicidal, and thus he was institutionalized. After investigation, the Catholic Church released a report with 156 pages, concluding that the occurrences in the house represented demonic infestation, obsession, oppression, and possession. After retiring from military intelligence, 32-year-old Bob Cranmer moved into his dream mansion on Brownsville Road with his family. The mansion had 14 rooms, leaded glass windows, big white pillars, ornate woodwork, and a large yard. Hearing that its previous owners were selling it, Bob offered them a bid they couldn't refuse. Thus, after finalizing the deal, Bob, his wife, and their 4 kids moved into their new mansion at 3406 Brownsville Road, Pennsylvania, in December of 1988. Right from the day the family moved in, they started feeling the strangeness of their new home. A strange beginning. According to what Bob writes in his autobiographical book, The Demon of Brownsville Road, his eldest son, named Bobby Jr., wandered away from his parents while moving in. After searching for him for quite some time, his parents found him crying, with his mouth wide open and eyes squeezed shut. After hearing his cries, the first one to reach him was Mrs. McHenry, the mansion's previous owner. She immediately embraced him as if she already expected it to happen. After letting him go, she told Bob and his wife Lisa that they had to keep track of their children in the house. Although it sounded creepy, the Cranmers dismissed the incident, attributing Mrs. McHenry's words to her old personality and reluctance to leave a home that she and her husband had put so much work into. According to Bob, walking into the house for the first time felt like walking into the bowels of a large ship. The strangeness of the house was overwhelming for the family, but they were trying their best to live with it. The kids of the family started acting strange, and they became extremely scared to be alone during the night. As a result, they would often sneak into their parents' bed by morning. Bobby, the eldest child, seemed to have developed a special dislike for his bed, as he would often be found curled up inside his closet and sound asleep. His parents tried their best to make him sleep in his bed, but as their efforts were not having any result, they put a small mattress in the closet for him to sleep. To help the family adapt better to their new house, Bob's mother suggested that they ask a priest to visit the house and bless it. Thus, Bob invited Father Victor, his mother's favourite priest, to bless the house. The priest was able to walk through and bless all the rooms of the house, except Bobby's bedroom. Bobby stood in the doorway of his room and, with tears pooling in his eyes, refused to let the priest go in. To avoid agitating the kid, the priest just blessed the outside of the room and left. Following this, the family learnt to live with the strangeness of the house. Also, it appeared as if the family was hit with good luck, as Bob started earning well and the family got a brand new car as well. In short, despite the strangeness in their new house, the family were enjoying good fortunes. Beginning of the paranormal. While Bob was digging his garden to plant flowers one day, in their first spring after moving in, he found a metal box buried 6 inches into the ground. When he opened it, he found religious artifacts that included crucifix and rosary beads. Not knowing what it was, he called the previous owner to inquire. When Bob told them about this box on the call, their voice started to tremble with fear, and they told him to put it back in the same place. Following this event, creepy things started to happen in the already creepy house. The initial paranormal events were benign, but annoying. Bob would often find the pull string of the light under the stairs, messily tangled up on the nail near it. With the children not tall enough to reach the string, and Lisa firmly denying doing it, Bob couldn't come up with a rational explanation. Also, the lights in the house, mainly the basement, kept turning on by themselves. Bob would often find his work chair pulled out to the middle of the room from his table, and the chair would be present, facing the furnace. Even the children of the family complained of hearing knocks and footsteps outside of their rooms during the night. But Bob and Lisa put the blame on their imaginations jokingly. They, however, started taking their claims seriously when they started complaining about a dark hooded figure that was stalking the corners, hallways, and doorways of the house. The creepy blue room. With the renovation of a part of the house commencing, and Bob rarely staying at home because of his new career in politics, Lisa started sleeping in Bobby's bedroom, which was called the Blue Room by the family. After moving into this room, Lisa started having a mental breakdown. Her condition worsened so much that she was admitted to a psychiatric ward for 2 weeks. According to the family, this room was somehow connected to darkness. Following her institutionalization, the tempers in the family flared up. Adding up to the fact that Bob was spending less time in the house, the relationship between the family members started to strain, and fights for petty things became inevitable. According to Bob, the Blue Room acted as a catalyst for the flaring tempers in the house. Bob, who had used the Blue Room as his bedroom for more than 6 years, reported seeing unsettling things in the room. He often saw a tall, dark, Grim Reaper-esque figure inside the room. It terrified him so much that he felt it would one day surely kill him. One day, while he was all alone in the house, lying down on the bed in the Blue Room, the then 10-year-old Bobby started hearing a strange noise. The noise resembled the sound of bagpipes, and it kept getting louder and louder. Suddenly, the door to his room opened on its own, and a static, childlike figure without a face entered the room. After this figure reached the end of his bed, another really tall, dark and hooded figure appeared in the doorway. With its hand extending outside its robe, it ran towards him. Bobby pulled his blanket over his face in fear, but his blanket was forcefully ripped away from him. With his terrified, glaring eyes, he saw another glowing figure floating above him, and it was faceless. He shut his eyes and started screaming in fear. Luckily, his mother soon returned, and all 3 figures disappeared. 2 priests intervene. By early 2004, the paranormal events in the house escalated so much that creepiness became a norm. Seeing dark figures and hearing strange sounds that included footsteps and knocks became normal. The family started sensing the odour of burning sulphur inside the house. These events paved the way for 2 priests named Ed Moran and Michael Salvanga, and after investigation, they concluded that the family were experiencing a demonic infestation. The first one to visit the family was Father Ed, offered to conduct a mass in their house. After listening to their story, after Father Ed's mass in the house, the strangeness in the house escalated. The very next day after the mass, all the picture frames in the house were somehow moved. In the days that followed, the furniture in the house started moving on its own. The taps in the bath opened on their own. Clocks and watches stopped working. Electrical appliances broke inexplicably. Plugs were getting pulled off their sockets, and the computers in the house were malfunctioning. One day after the mass, while Bobby and his girlfriend were in their bedroom, a CD flew out of nowhere towards him. With Bobby ducking down in time, it slammed into the wall and broke into pieces. In short, the house was in paranormal mayhem. Soon, the second priest, Father Michael, visited the house. Although not an out-and-out exorcist, he had built a reputation for deliverance. By then, the paranormal entity in the house had become more aggressive. It appeared as if its only purpose was to break the family into pieces. The events in the house were pushing the family members away from each other, and instead of fighting it together, they were fighting amongst themselves. Bob and Lisa came close to divorce multiple times, and they were fighting a war with themselves. Also, Bobby and Charlie, the couple's other son, tried killing themselves. Everyone who slept in the house started having terrible nightmares, and occasionally, when they woke up, they found long, deep scratches and bite marks on their body. Also, after Father Michael's visit, the family started finding strange puddles of liquid that resembled blood on the floor and walls on the house. Mostly red in colour, it was also found on the metal threads of burnt-out bulbs. At times, they were found 9 feet up the wall on the staircase. Bob, who thought that it was one of the family members doing it, couldn't rationalise it now as no one in the house was tall enough to reach that high. The liquid felt like amniotic fluid, and according to Bob, it appeared as if the walls were bleeding. This, however, did not stop Father Michael, and he continued visiting the house and conducting masses for them. Introduction of a clairvoyant woman. After being suggested by one of Ron's political friends, another priest named Ron joined the paranormal party. Strangely, Father Ron did not visit the property, and he only instructed them what to do on the phone. Father Ron sought the help of a Christian mystic named Connie Valenti. She was a clairvoyant with the power to remotely view places, and with this power, she helped the Cranmer family. Through Ron, she instructed Bob to cover a mirror in the house. She also asked Bob to walk through the house room by room, while placing a small pinch of salt in every corner and doorway. While doing this, she asked him to authoritatively ask the evil entity in his house to leave. All the while, Father Michael continued to do masses for the family, but the paranormal activity worsened. History behind the haunting. Through her visions, Connie saw two past happenings that she considered as the reason behind the paranormal events in the house. The first event was about a doctor who lived on the same street, and the second was about a mother and her 3 children. Long before the Cranmers moved in, there lived a doctor on Brownsville Road. He lived a few blocks away from the haunted mansion, and he had a bad reputation for performing illegal operations. He was a rude man who was drunk while performing procedures on his patients. Also, he was extremely careless and never focused on the situation. This led to the loss of lives and extreme bloodshed. To cover up his crimes, he rented a small room in the Cranmers mansion and made it his covert clinic. He stored the remains of termination and the bodies of his dead patients in this room, and when no one was around, he took these remains to the basement and burnt them into the furnace. The room he rented was none other than the Blue Room. Also, back in the 18th century, a woman with her 3 children was brutally murdered by the Native Americans in order to discourage continued pioneer settlement. Her husband, who had been away fighting in the Northwest India War, returned only to find the dead bodies of his family members. He buried them under the oak tree on the porch of the Cranmers' house and left the place. Thus, according to Connie, the grave combined with the blood-soaked medical procedures that followed manifested a dark entity that fed on the pain and suffering of the innocent. To add on, while the property was being built, one of the workers started developing a romantic attraction towards the original owner's wife. But when she rejected his advances, he cursed the family and the house and left. Paranormal investigation. With the paranormal events in the house not reducing, Father Roy decided to reach out to the church and ask them to send a trained exorcist. So, to get the needed verification, Bob reached out to a third-party paranormal investigation group led by a man named Adam. During their investigation, Adam had inexplicable claw marks appear on his forehead. They noted temperature changes inside the house, and their technical equipment started malfunctioning. The paranormal investigation group found a secret space in the middle of the house. The small L-shaped area was filled with black coal dust, and it had a palm-sized amber stone, a complete skeleton of a bird, some of Bob's old Lego toys, and a crumpled piece of paper with creepy drawings on both sides. The atmosphere inside the space was heavy, and it emitted darkness. The exorcism. With the findings of the investigation, Father Roy successfully persuaded the church to send the chief exorcist of the Archdiocese of New York, named James. Thus, in September of 2005, Father James, accompanied by a young priest named Father Ben and Father Michael, started the exorcism ritual in Cranmer's mansion. For Bob, this exorcism was a disappointment. He expected a lot of paranormal action, just as he saw in movies, but nothing strange happened during the exorcism ritual. Father James, however, told him that the exorcism was successful. He warned the family to expect echo events for a few months and left. Just as Father James predicted, traces of the paranormal kept dwindling in the house, but they were merely benign. Finally, on February 24th, 2006, the activity completely ceased after Father Michael held a mass in the basement of the house. During the mass, a black, hazy outline of a figure appeared out of nowhere. The figure started moving towards the secret space in the house, and Bob and Father Michael closely followed it. Michael raised his crucifix and started praying loudly, asking it to leave. The entity that was haunting the family and driving them to insanity melted onto the floor and disappeared. Thus, after 17 long years, the family were finally out of the clutches of the demon that haunted them. Lee Moore had been dating his girlfriend Elisa since he was 18. They were a great couple who were supportive of each other. Elisa was an extremely sympathetic partner who was always there for Lee. With everything so perfect, Lee was praying that the relationship would last long. He even started working double jobs to save enough money for their marriage. But things quickly took a U-turn after Elisa met her new friend named Cheryl in early 2007. Cheryl was a self-proclaimed witch who dabbled in the occult. A supernaturally forced breakup. After meeting her, Elisa's demeanour completely changed. From a humble and caring woman, she turned into a dark and irritable one. Over the next few weeks, Elisa started hanging out more with her new witch friend, and it had adverse effects on her relationship with Lee. It appeared as if Elisa's new friend had a romantic interest in her, and she was persuading her into breaking up with Lee. Soon, Lee started having terrible nightmares. Even while awake, he had a constant sense of being watched, even while no one was around. When he told this to Elisa, she simply shunned him away. One day, while Lee was walking down the driveway towards his house, he saw a huge black mass floating above his house. Looking at it gave Lee a twisting feel in his stomach, and he collapsed down on the floor. Seeing him suffer, Elisa rushed towards him to lift him up. Lee showed the mass to Elisa, but before she could see it, it disappeared. Before Lee could get a proper word with his girlfriend, Cheryl walked towards the couple. She looked dead at Lee and told him, "It's nothing," in a sarcastic way. Following this event, Lee started feeling as if someone else was in the house with him, but his girlfriend never believed him. One day, while getting ready to go to a baseball match, Lee was looking for his favourite baseball shirt, which he had since high school. But since he couldn't find it, he asked Elisa if she had seen it. Elisa started beating around the bush, but when he asked this question, and he understood that she was trying to hide something. Elisa's behaviour towards him was getting worse with every passing day, and not being able to bear with it anymore, Lee split up with her. To focus more on himself and recover, he went back to St. Louis, Missouri. Into a new house. 5 years later, Lee fell in love with another woman named Claire. They got along well with each other, and they ended up marrying each other. With Claire pregnant, the first thing they did after their marriage was get a house for them to move into. After a thorough house search, the couple purchased a considerably spacious old house with their savings and moved in. On the very first day after moving in, the couple heard footsteps and shuffles in their bedroom. Lee immediately drew out his pistol and, holding it high, walked into his bedroom to investigate. The moment he opened the door to the bedroom, the footsteps stopped and he found no one inside it. Since the house was old, the couple concluded that the sound was being caused by the house itself and brushed it off. Confirmation of the paranormal. A few days later, while the couple was sound asleep in the bedroom one night, Lee heard a loud slamming sound come from the hall, and it woke him up. Thinking he had an intruder, Lee immediately rushed towards the hall with his gun. But when he reached the hall, he found everything in place, and there was no one else. As he stood there, clouded with confusion, a coffee table in front of him slowly raised up the floor and fell back with great force. It appeared as if something invisible lifted the table off the floor and threw it back. This completely creeped Lee out, and he started sweating profusely. Hearing the sound of the table falling, Claire rushed to the aid of her husband, only to find him in a petrified state. The couple understood that they had a paranormal guest. The next day, while the couple were cleaning their porch, Claire headed to the shed to pick a shovel for her husband. The moment she stepped into the shed, she started feeling extreme darkness around her. Completely contrary to the temperature outside, the shed was freezing cold. Sensing that something was wrong, Claire turned around and tried to run out of the shed. But before she could take a step, something invisible pushed her hard from behind. Hearing her screams, Lee rushed towards the shed, but he found nothing unordinary inside it. Claire was unnerved by this incident, and she felt extremely uncomfortable staying in the house. Later that day, while Claire was lying down in the bathtub, she started hearing the sound of heavy footsteps, and they seemed to be coming from the neighbouring room. Thinking it was her husband, she started calling out his name, but she got no reply. The footsteps kept getting louder, and they started approaching the bathroom. Once the footsteps reached the bathroom door, the sound stopped. As Claire stared at the bathroom door of the eerily silent room, a black demonic figure with bright glowing eyes appeared right in front of her, and it started drowning her by pushing her head into the water. With Claire struggling for her life, the demonic figure magically disappeared. Following this event, the couple concluded that their house was haunted, but little did they know, the problem was not with the house, but with Lee himself. The first cleansing. In attempts to get a better understanding of the paranormal entity in the house, the couple reached out to a local paranormal investigator named Lita, who had considerable strangeness attached to her. The moment Lita entered their house, she claimed that she sensed something demonic inside it. After scanning the house completely, she started doing the EVP session, in which she asked Lee to ask questions to the entity in the house. Although his initial questions did not seem to trigger anything unnatural, the moment he shouted, "Are you demonic?" strange things started to happen. The lights of the house started flickering, and Lee's eyes rolled back. Lee started growling in a demonic voice, and he was acting as if he was under the control of something. Lee told, "I don't know," in his demonic voice, and collapsed onto the floor unconscious. When he regained conscious, he did not seem to remember anything. Lita told them that they had a demonic infestation, and she sent 2 demonologists named Deal and Farah to investigate their house. After investigating, the demonologist duo concluded that the house indeed had a demon in it, and proceeded with the cleansing ritual after seeking the couple's permission. During the cleansing ritual, Lee started feeling short of breath. Suddenly, a demonic figure appeared right in front of him, and it started choking him. Seeing that he was struggling, Deal placed his hand on him and started praying. As Deal prayed, Lee saw the demonic figure disappear, and he was able to breathe again. Deal and Farah successfully completed the cleansing ritual, and the couple were able to feel relief instantly. Deal told Lee that it was not the house that was haunted, but him. After questioning Lee, Deal concluded that his ex-girlfriend Elisa, with the help of her girlfriend Cheryl, put a demon on his trail. According to Deal, Lee's missing baseball t-shirt did not actually go missing, but it was used by Elisa and Cheryl to put a curse on him. Following the cleansing, the disturbing events in the house stopped. With the delivery date nearing, the couple were peacefully getting ready to welcome their baby. Possession and exorcism. A few days after the cleansing ritual, the couple were visited by Lita again. She claimed that the demon was still present in their house, and she said that she had to drive it away with a ritual. As they were expecting their baby, the couple decided not to take any risks and allowed her to do the ritual. After completing the ritual, she ended up leaving the house without uttering a word. Following this ritual, the demonic presence returned. That night, Claire found her husband lying unconscious on the bed, with blood oozing out of his nose and mouth. Claire immediately called the ambulance and rushed him to a nearby hospital. On the way, she called Deal and Farah and asked them to come to the hospital as well. After checking Lee, the doctors figured out that his liver and kidneys were shutting down, but they were not able to figure out the reason behind it. The doctors told Claire that if things didn't get better, her husband would surely meet his demise. This completely broke Claire's heart. As she stood near Lee's bed with tears rolling down her cheeks, the demonologist duo reached the hospital. Asking Lee not to worry, they started exorcising Lee. During the exorcism, Lee's body started shaking violently and he gave out demonic growls. The growls suddenly stopped and Lee opened his eyes. His vitals became normal and his liver and kidney started functioning normally again. Claire was elated to see her husband recover, and even the doctors were pleasantly surprised. According to the demonologist duo, Lita did a pagan ritual in their house in an attempt to drive out the demon, but instead of driving it out, it caused the demon to return. Lee and Claire continued to live happily in the same house with their child. Last week, I was very excited to go on a tour of an abandoned schoolhouse near my house. It was closed for like 12 years, and it was a very gloomy place. The tour promised a paranormal experience, but it wasn't really like that. When I arrived, there was a Beetlejuice's narrator that was guiding the whole thing. It was a very dirty and smelly place, and I hoped for the worst. Then, when it started, all my illusion fell. The whole tour was a more theatrical insight into a kind of exorcism. Instead of feeling disappointed, I was very grateful because I had a lot of fun during the whole play. The next day, I was cooking some lunch for the family and I decided to get some water from the fridge. And the water was at room temperature, and when I let it sit on the table to get a cup, the jar just exploded and I got like 3 pieces on me. I decided to clean it all up before someone noticed it, but then I realised that it was very difficult for this to happen because the jar was at room temperature and it just exploded out of nowhere. This was only the start, because every day something different happened. Like yesterday, when all the plants that I took care of for years started to wither. Or on the weekend, when I started to hear the doorknobs of rooms that were already opened, or people walking on the second floor when nobody was around. My family is kinda concerned about the situation, but they're waiting for this event to disappear one day by itself. I don't know what's happening, so I decided to think that it's a spirit that followed me to my house and is causing all these unexpected events. Does someone know what all of this means? There have been some weird noises and things going on in my house for a few months now, so I thought I'd tell y'all what's going on and see what you all think. This past summer, my husband and I moved in with his mom, as she's elderly and has health issues, and my husband felt that it wasn't safe for her to live by herself any longer. Before we moved in, we had been living a couple of towns over, which was about 25 or 30 minutes from there. As we lived relatively close, I hadn't spent a significant amount of time there. Never overnight, just would come visit for a few hours and then go back home. Well, within the first couple weeks of living there, I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something wasn't right with the house. I mentioned it to my husband, and he just kind of shook it off. He said that when his mom bought the house about 12 years ago, he stayed there for about a month, and he hadn't noticed anything then. To give you a frame of reference, it's a single-story brick house with 3 bedrooms and about 1,800 square feet. There's an attic, but there aren't any stairs. It's more like a crawl space. There isn't a basement, as we're in East Texas. When his mom bought the house, it had only been built about 2 years prior, as it was the model home for the newly constructed subdivision. So this is what's been happening. For about a week and a half to 2 weeks after I had mentioned feeling the weird vibes, my husband started waking up in the middle of the night, but not understanding why. This would happen 2 or 3 times a week, and he wouldn't be able to fall back asleep for another hour or 2. Well, by the second week of this occurring, he would just lay in bed, listening and looking out our partially opened bedroom door, which allows you to see part of the living room and partly into the kitchen, watching the shadows in that area. At this point, he'd be awake for 3 or 4 hours before being able to go back to sleep. He said that sometimes it would look like the shadows move, but he attributed that to the motion light outside the front door, which partially illuminates the living room as the front door is beveled glass. Then things started to get a little weird. After a week or so, on and off, of watching the shadows, one night when he was awoken, he thought he could hear 2 people talking outside our bedroom, on the other side of the wall in the side yard. At this point, he woke me up and asked me to listen if I could hear the talking as well. And yet, I sure could. So he got up, grabbed his pistol, and went outside. He first walked the perimeter and then around the backyard and behind the buildings out back, but he couldn't find anyone or anything. We've been here for about 6 months, and every so often we'll hear talking, but there's no one outside. I've also had my own strange auditory occurrences. I've heard it maybe 3 or 5 times since we've been here. The most recent was last night. All the times that I've heard it, it's been around 10 or 11 p.m. while I've been in the walk-in closet in our bedroom. Suddenly, I'll hear boom, boom, like someone is knocking real loud on a wall or door, but I can't pinpoint where in the house it's coming from. When I heard it last night, I quickly walked out into the living room to see if someone was really knocking on the front door. Well, when I went out there, my dog was laying on the floor in the area between the living room and the kitchen, and he just looked up at me, wondering what the hell I was doing. He has excellent hearing, so if anyone had knocked, he would have been barking. I went back into my room, to the inside of the closet to finish what I was doing. Not even a minute or 2 later, I hear the knocking again, but this time it's more urgent and rapid, like someone wants in right now. Can anyone make sense of this? Has anyone experienced this themselves?